And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In 1910, Stewart and Hyder, then known as Portland City, were joined by a 2-mile-long road made from pylons across the tide flats. The area then hosted close to 10,000 people who were still residing in tents, waiting for buildings to be built on the pylons. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to 1977.
The northern community of Stewart has had its share of ups and downs since it was first surveyed in the early 1900s. Two brothers, Robert and John Stewart, staked out the original town site in those days after prospectors discovered the mineral potential in the area. Things moved slowly until 1910, when Mackenzie Mann and Company announced their decision to build a standard gauge railway from Stewart through the Nass Valley to the Peace River wheat belt. Work began on the line and, although never completed, did spur the area into its first boom. The tent community began to disappear, and wooden structures became more commonplace. The hills were being prospected, and small mines began to appear in every little nook and cranny. During this period, a number of claims were amalgamated into the Silverback Premier Mine, the major source of employment for the town's people. Operations at this landmark mine began, and until 1953 helped keep the community alive and prospering. Miners, prospectors, prostitutes, drunkards, and businessmen flocked to Stewart for a time to get what they could out of the men who worked at mines throughout the isolated area. Premier Mine closed down after a disastrous fire that destroyed the concentrator and most of the buildings. A new mill was built down the road from the original one, but never operated to the peak of the previous years. Stewart was on its way to becoming a ghost town. The people hung on. The community had seen 2 wars and 3 economic depressions and still remained. Then another lease on life was on the horizon. The Grand Duke Operating Company sunk $100 million into a mining operation near the town. For the next 10 years, Grand Duke became the area's major employer, but it was too good to last. The mine cut its production in half. The ore reserves thought to be there were not as economically feasible as first anticipated. The town enjoyed the good years and persevered through the bad. One major factor in the longevity of Stewart is the people never gave up hope that one day the community would become a major center for developing the North. Transportation was a handicap to the community's development through the years, and continues to be so. Lance Potterton, the first provincial police officer in the community, talks about some of the problems and events he remembers.
Yeah, but I landed by parachute. When I landed, I wouldn't have known where I was for a little while. Sure, I had to look around for a while because there's not very many of the old buildings left, and there's lots of new ones. This town has got a lot going for it right now. They've got hard-top roads, they've got cement sidewalks, they've got 2 nice, lovely schools here. They've got a swimming pool, they've got a civic center, and they've got some lovely homes out in the area where the Grand Duke own their homes out there. So I think for a town of about 12,000 people, I think they have a lot going for them. I came here first. I landed here on the 4th of June, 1926, and this was a wide open town. I thought at that time there was about probably 625 women living in town, women and children living in town, and with the men folks, I suppose that you could multiply that by 3, and that would give you about what was in the town at that time. Probably the same as it is right now, but there were about 3,500 to 4,000 men out in the hills, living in bunkhouses and prospecting in the hills and trappers. And so it was a different kind of a town entirely. There's no comparison with what the town is today than it was in 1926 when I came here. I was the policeman, and I was the deputy game warden. I was the local assistant fire marshal, and I was the sanitary inspector. I suppose there was 1,500 men in town just come in for a big drunk at that day. The Premier never closed down, but a lot of the men took the day off to come down here. A lot of the other mines that did close down. And it was a pretty wild night. In the daytime, it was fine. Nobody bothered. All out for a good time. Everybody having a holiday. I was a member of the hardball team here, and in the afternoon I played the outfield for the ball team, and it was a holiday. Didn't bother anybody, and nobody bothered me until in the early hours of the next morning. I guess it was the worst time they came along. They had a big dance, and they had a couple of bouncers there who knew the business, and they bounced a lot of them out, and finally some of those that got bounced into the jail. So that's about what it amounted to.
One cannot talk about Stewart and not mention Hyder, Alaska. Portland City, as it was first named, got its start about the same time as Stewart. The main section of the town has long gone, but a few buildings remain and have become renowned throughout the North American continent. All that remains of the original town are a few pilings on which buildings once sat. Inventions were part of history there. H.R. McDonald, a Hyder resident, had his invention of a four-wheel hydraulic braking system taken up by an American company. It was applied throughout the automotive industry.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. The Nisga'a people had lived along the banks of the Nass River and knew the area at the end of the Portland Canal. They named it Safe House because it was a good location for them to hide when the Haida and Tlingit from the outer coast came to raid their villages. Let us return to the archives as Ward Stewart shares why the post office is important.
Ward Stewart, the son of the man after whom the community is named, gives some recollections of those early days.
To establish the town site, the first thing they was to do was to have a post office. So my dad stayed up here all one winter with my mother. The boat came in once a week with the mail, and everybody else went out, of course, and he stayed here. Then, so naturally, it was assumed that the town would be called Stewart. Even though my dad wasn't the first postmaster, Uncle John probably would have got the name, but originally it was called Northcliffe. That chunk up there was going to give it its name. Yes, there's a lot of changes, but some of the old buildings are still here. Some of them could be fixed up if the town ever goes ahead. They're not that far gone, you know. The thing I did notice, I was here in '63, that the buildings were, some of them they were leaning one way and leaning the other way, but they had a fire and cleaned out a lot of the old ones, and they were able to rebuild with new structures. Oh, I think it's coming along fine. And if we ever get the railway through here like we were supposed to, it will be well away again. Up in the museum, I brought a book up to the museum that I found in the family, and it's all newspaper clippings back about 1918 and 1910, 1908 to 1910, around there, and the enthusiasm of the people in the territory about the railway then, when Sir Donald Mann was going to put the railway through. It's fantastic, and it's all just coming to the surface again. We're now, trying to get the railway going again.
Well, you talk a lot about the Big Missouri. How many years did it run, and approximately when did it shut down?
I don't really know. It was working in '34. They were doing development work, and it wasn't until about 1936, 37, 38 that they really began to move the machinery. Now, the machinery came from Antiochs, down the big Granby mill down there. The powerhouse came from Granby in Antiochs. The powerhouse is still there, as far as I know. There are some people going in. I wanted to go in there and have a look, but there's too much snow. So I think some of the boys are going in with the helicopter to have a look around. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on.
On July 1st of this year, during the Heritage Day celebrations in Stewart, Ward was honored by residents of the community and asked to plant a tree to commemorate the future growth of the town. Old-timers come to the area for holidays, and some still prospect in the area, looking for that once-in-a-lifetime strike. These people are optimistic that what once was will be again. Stewart will grow with the industry.
When I came in here, there's nothing but mud. And now you see here, it's all built up. Hey.
What's changed the most in the town that you can see?
Well, it's really modern now. When I was here, it was nothing but pack horses and tents.
Any of the existing buildings here?
Oh, there was just the odd shack, that's all it was.
Has Hyder changed much at all except for decreasing?
Not a damn bit. No, it hasn't changed any since I first saw it.
Oh, this is grown. None of this. Of course, this hotel, the old hotel burned down, and Ian built this new one. And the telephone building's been built, and these motel buildings, and all this street here, the drugstore and the bank and all, that's all new since I came up here. And even down this other way, well, this building here was new. The old hotel, the old Marmot Hotel burned down here. And then Charlie built the big department store and the food market on this side since, that's only been in the last 10 years, though, I guess.
Both of you gentlemen are up here for just the weekend?
No, Evan, no, we're prospecting up here.
Prospecting? How far out of town?
Well, we were way up Bitter Creek yesterday and Roosevelt Creek. Now I'm going up over the top.
The provincial and federal governments are just now beginning to realize the importance this area can play in the future of northern development. For years it has been asked, why is there no interest in developing a port facility there? It is the most northerly ice-free port in the province and a gateway to mineral and wood resources of the north. A man instrumental in bringing attention to the current plight of the community is Mayor Ian MacLeod. For the past while, he has been referred to as a thorn in the side of both the provincial government and the Member of Parliament for the area, Iona Campanolo. His constant nattering has put Stewart on the map and placed a well-known problem in the laps of both governments: transportation. Since then, money has been sunk into developing Highway 37, the only road access to Stewart. This may not prove to be sufficient as the road is blocked by avalanches during the winter months. Rifto Straits has cut its barge service. No other water transportation has been firmed up, and things could deteriorate during the winter. Food shortages could become a thing to be concerned about. But even with the uncertain future, residents and perhaps a few speculators are optimistic. The future of the North lies in that community that refuses to die, Stewart.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Blue stain fungi are not helpful to trees. In fact, they have evolved relationships with bark beetles like the mountain pine beetle that allow them to travel from tree to tree on a special structure in the beetle's mouth parts and feed on the living tissue of the tree. Let us return the archives with Forest Service Joe Grigwell.
For the past several years, serious trouble has been brewing in the forests of interior British Columbia. The trouble is in the form of a tiny, quarter-inch long bug called the mountain pine beetle. In the Prince Rupert Forest District, which extends eastward from the Queen Charlotte's to Vanderhoof, over 30,000 acres are under attack by the insects. Particularly hard hit have been the Hazelton and Kitwanga areas. There, the pest is out of control. What this means is that unless it's logged, all the mature lodgepole pine in the vicinity will be dead within a very few years. Forest Service entomologist Joe Grigwell explains the life cycle of the beetle.
The mountain pine beetle has a one-year cycle. The adults emerge from the trees in July and August, depending on the weather, and fly to surrounding trees and bore into the bark and lay eggs. These eggs hatch in 3 weeks, and the larvae, which is a state that they overwinter in, can withstand temperatures up to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The larvae develop in the spring into pupae, and these pupae advance into adults by late June, and the cycle is therefore repeated. The mountain pine beetle attacks essentially mature trees. That's a mature lodgepole pine, and usually take the biggest and the best.
Weather conditions in the past few years were extremely favorable to the development of the beetle. Hot, dry summers and mild winters, coupled with an ample supply of mature pine, allowed rapid multiplication of the pests. According to a Forest Service spokesman, a number of factors were to blame for rapid spread of pine beetles in the Hazelton area: lack of cooperation from private landowners, and slow reaction from the Forest Service itself gave the bugs enough of a head start to make control impossible. Ian Bowie is the acting ranger in the Hazelton area. He describes the Forest Service strategy for dealing with the pine beetle.
This is a clear-cut area, Bob. It represents total removal of all the stand, including the deciduous. It's generally done in conjunction with a burning and planting operation, as against an area where we may type log or landscape log and leave as much of the residual trees and deciduous as possible. As you notice in this area, the edges of the logging are regular rather than following types. The boundaries are square. That's to make it easier when you're burning, so that you don't have fingers to give you escapes. In type logging, of course, you would follow around the edges rather than have these regular boundaries.
Have you already burned this?
This area has had the landings and accumulations burnt. As you notice just over the edge of the landing here, that's all been burnt in there. It's been burnt around the major accumulations of slash have been burnt.
And you have to get rid entirely of the beetle-infested timber. It has to be removed or burned.
Yes. Our operation in this area is basically a salvage type operation. The beetle has spread so badly that there is no way that we will totally eradicate it. You can never totally eradicate a beetle infestation anyway. But our concerns are to try and salvage as much of this sawlog material as we can possibly get. It's involved in our allowable annual cut, and it's of course our highest quality timber is our sawlog material as against pulp material.
Ian, what are we looking at here?
This is a landscape or type logging. Now, as you notice, as compared to the other area that we were on, which was everything was level right to the ground, we've left all the deciduous, that's birch and aspen that you see in the background here. And also there's a number of advanced balsam regenerants. There's some hemlock and a little spruce in there scattered throughout. These will contribute to the next rotation or the next crop.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Parks Canada employs some short-term management techniques to slow down the mountain pine beetle outbreaks. Cutting and burning the colonized or susceptible trees is one way to slow the spread of the mountain pine beetle to mature pine forests. In this final segment of Open Connection, Joe Griegel shares how this benefits the forests.
One of our reasons for leaving this, of course, is to cooperate with the Fish and Wildlife in leaving some protective habitat for the wildlife within the logged openings. Now, while you can see it's not a dense cover, it does give them some cover, and also apparently contributes to their feed. This area, we feel, will regenerate naturally. That's with no help from us. The area has been scarified through logging. Just the mechanics of skidding and yarding have created a seed bed for the natural seed fall. And as you just noticed there on the ground, that there are seedlings coming already, and this is only a year old now. There's only a couple. It's going to take a while before this will seed in, and probably about 3 years. But I feel that there'll be no problem establishing a second crop in this area. We wouldn't have to burn and plant in this type of a stand.
Oddly enough, it's not the beetles that kill the trees, but a fungus that always accompanies infestation. When the mature beetle bores into the tree and tunnels upward to deposit eggs, it carries with it a fungus which attacks the sapwood of the tree. Later on, when the larvae hatch the next year, they feed on this fungus. It's the fungus that stops the flow of nutrients from the roots to the branches and kills the tree. But not only does the fungus kill the tree, it also reduces the value of the wood when the log is salvaged by virtue of the blue stain it imparts to the sapwood it infects. The stain does not weaken the fiber of the wood, but it does detract from its appearance. The beetles do have some natural enemies. Woodpeckers, clarid beetles, and fly larvae all eat pine beetles. Cold weather can also have devastating effects on the pest population. The eggs need a temperature of between 40 and 100 degrees to hatch. A cold snap of 50 below will kill them if it lasts long enough. But because they prefer the biggest, oldest trees with the thickest bark to attack, it rarely gets cold enough for long enough to kill them. The only other known enemy of the pine beetle is man. We can kill them, but it's hard, slow, and costly work. Among the human weapons at our disposal are 2 insecticides, ethylene dibromide and lindane. The trouble with these is they have to be applied to individual trees, making it practically impossible to treat large tracts of timber, and they're dangerous to other life forms as well. There's also the alternative of felling and burning infested trees, but the same objections apply here as with chemicals. Work is being done on chemical attractants to draw large numbers of beetles to dummy trees and thus manipulate their population, but so far no practical solutions have surfaced. Sanitation salvage logging, as utilized by the Forest Service in Hazelton, has 2 advantages. It utilizes timber that would shortly be worthless, and it reduces the number of beetles and their food source. Even the best sanitation salvage operation won't contain an extensive outbreak, though, or prevent recurrence in remaining trees. So remaining timber stands have to be inspected on an annual basis. Cutting of uninfested trees in infested areas can't be done during the flight period because removal of nearby host trees only encourages the bugs to range further afield in search of new homes. With a good wind, the pine beetle has been known to fly up to 20 miles. Hauling and stockpiling of infested logs can't be done in the summer flight period either. Even bark and edgings from infested logs contain the insects and have to be burned or buried before the flight period. The salvage operation has to conform to strict sanitation standards if it's to work at all. Stumps have to be cut to a maximum of a foot in height, and culled logs, if they're infested, should be burned before the flight period. These standards aren't easy to follow, especially when large areas of timber are affected, so the problem of containing the spread of the beetles is a difficult one. Given the combination of warm, dry climate, lots of mature pine stands, there's just no way to eliminate the pine beetle by forestry procedures. About all that can be done is to harvest available pine before it reaches an age of more than 80 years. Meanwhile, forestry people are pretty well resigned to losing most, if not all, of the mature lodgepole pine in the interior part of the Rupert Forest District. On a province-wide basis, the loss of lodgepole pine is about 1.3 million cubic feet of timber a year for the last 20 years. That's about 3% of the annual cut. In the Hazelton area, however, the pine is often a sizable percentage of accessible timber.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our mastery within. I'm Robert Pictou.